You're listening to the Mississippi Outdoors Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Wyatt. You know, you might be hunting next to an open field that used to be woods, or in woods that used to be an open field. Why do you need to know the history of that property? We're going to talk with historians today, Jim Giesen and Mark Hersey, on the podcast.
This episode of Mississippi Outdoors Podcast is sponsored by the Foundation for Mississippi Wildlife, Fisheries, Parks, and Marine.
All right, thanks for tuning in. We got Jim Giesen, Mark Hersey here from Mississippi State. And history, I saw history professors. You know, when I first saw it, I thought, well, is Chip, are we going to talk about, I don't know, antebellum history or Civil War homes? But I mean, I guess we could.
Sure. Yeah.
But really more so, we're going to talk about land as it pertains to our history of Mississippi, and then maybe as it pertains to hunters now. Like, where do we start that conversation, you think, Jim?
Well, maybe just a brief little description of how environmental history started.
Okay.
Because it is different, and it evolved out of course, history. But in about the 1960s, the time of like people thinking about the environment in a different way, kind of the environmental movement, right? A lot of scholars started looking at the effect that nature had on human events. You know, we always think about humans changing nature, but this was like, you know, well, what's going on in this forest that is changing the way that the American colonies are developing and that kind of thing. And so it's really not that old of a field, but, and Mark can talk about this because he sort of was developed it differently than me, but I was a PhD student at the University of Georgia and was studying cotton, and I was interested really in cotton farmers and tenant farmers. And I started studying this little insect called the boll weevil, which was wreaking havoc across the South. And so I thought about, well, this is such a strange historical force because it's this little bug, right? People were saying this is an act of God. This has nothing to do with what people are doing, right? And so that sort of captured my interest in the environment. And then being at Mississippi State is a perfect place to study, you know, environment and agriculture and history.
Yeah. And Mark, as you know, to piggyback on what he's saying in your experience, Mississippi specifically, maybe as compared to states around, you spent time, you know, in school in Alabama, you're from the Northeast, but where is a good place to start that conversation in regards to just Mississippi, do you think?
Well, the obvious place is probably the Delta. That's
right.
Where everybody goes to. I'm working on a book project on the Black Prairie region, the Black Belt of Alabama and Mississippi. And so it's of a single piece. So that's all from where I go. But yeah, Mississippi's just so biologically diverse, some of the most diverse freshwater ecosystems in the world, really. You know, the southern part was once home to the longleaf pine forest, which was, you know, the most biologically diverse forest in North America. So, yeah, there's lots of places. You can be in almost anywhere. Just like throw a pin, you know, throw a dart at Mississippi map, and you can find a place to start talking about the environmental history of the place in an interesting way.
You know, and when you mentioned the Delta too, so I'll ask, you know, general elementary questions, just thoughts that come to my head. But I've at times maybe come across someone mention, you know, the idea that years ago the Delta was forest. Mm-hmm. So when I drive there and spend time there, I can't even picture it.
Yeah,
it's hard to picture it. But in terms of how it affects us and hunters and people who like the outdoors, it really goes back to that.
Yeah, I mean, it's an amazingly recent transition. So there are cities, I think it's Clarksdale, which has like a city layout planned before the Civil War, and they come back after the Civil War and like trees have grown in where they'd like plotted these streets because, you know, everybody was moving around. They were ahead of themselves right before the Civil War, and it's really a region that developed after the Civil War because of a bunch of technology, mostly railroads and machinery, and then this huge influx of people, who were really brought to Mississippi before the war, stayed after the war, and chopped down the trees.
Okay.
And then just the levees and the drainage. And that's hard work before bulldozers.
Sure.
And so they drain the land, and that's the Delta we see today. So there's soggier parts and drier parts, but basically the levees hold off the rivers. And then what they uncovered was, you know, the best farmland in the world, literally. And so then you've got all of this money that pours in from all over the world. Anyone who's interested in cotton, which is people all over the world, mill interests, and they're just buying up tens of thousands of acres to make these huge cotton plantations.
Yeah. So historically, this is all, maybe it's almost rhetorical. I think I know the answer, but historically, and with what you're talking about here in Mississippi, hunting, outdoor land use like that, does it always overlap with that farmland and sort of how that's used and developed, if that's the right word?
I mean, I don't think it always does, but Mark, do you want to talk about this because you know this better? But like the rise of whitetail deer and how that's influenced by agriculture.
Sure. The whitetail deer are a really interesting story. They're tied to the industrialization stuff you're talking about in Britain. Of course, whitetail hunting is ancient in Mississippi. It goes back thousands of years. For the most part, it was done more or less sustainably until Native Americans got plugged into this global market. Basically, England's industrializing. They need leather to drive machinery, literally drive the industrial machinery. And the whitetail are a good outlet for this. And so massive slaughter. And there's still, in Northeast Mississippi, where I'm writing about in the early 1800s, there are reports of people killing 400 deer a year, which is a number I wouldn't recommend these days.
Sure.
But, there's lots of deer. By the late 19th century, they're gone. And really, it was Native Americans, just the Southeastern Indians' bad luck in some ways, that the deerskin trade collapsed at basically the same time that the cotton gin made it possible to turn these fields white with the bolls of cotton.
Okay.
And deer are really rare throughout the early, into the early 20th century. Mississippi, as I'm sure you know, was really late to develop any kind of formal protections, any kind of government bureaucracy that's going to protect them. Mm-hmm. Last state in the country to do this in 1932, really forced into this by Fanny Cook and others. By the time they do, there's maybe, 2,500 deer in the state. And then we get these sort of these introductions, and they're trying to foster this population. But as late as 1950, there are about 0.3 deer. There's about one deer for every 3 square kilometers. They measure these in kilometers. By 1960, there's 4 deer per square. So per square kilometer. So there's huge growth. And that happened to coincide not just with these introductions, but with a dramatic shift in Mississippi's agriculture, where cotton had been king for a long time. And deer can eat young cotton, of course, but they do much better with soybeans, it turns out. And for lots of reasons, there's a transition to soybeans in the post-war era. Soybeans are like a non-important crop in the eve of World War II. And for lots of reasons that we don't need to talk about, they become a big crop after World War II, and deer thrive in soybeans. Yeah. And so the Black Prairie region of Alabama and Mississippi becomes one of the best places in the world to hunt whitetail trophies in the 1950s and 60s. And a lot of this has to do with agricultural transformations. I mean, even now, again, as I'm sure a lot of these listeners will know, like the single greatest, best indicator of deer health, deer size, antler size, is proximity to row crop agriculture, especially soybeans. Yeah. So there's, and that's not what the people were thinking when they were planting soybeans. They're thinking about making money. They're not thinking about big deer population, but it played a huge role. And there are other things that are happening at the same time. Tree farms are coming around. That's going to help with some of this, although that plays a bigger role, I think, in hog populations. We get farm ponds are federally subsidized. They begin to proliferate. We get these large impoundments, which are also going to create new habitat for them. And deer thrive in suburban environments. So as America suburbanizes after World War II, they create an ideal habitat for deer.
Mm-hmm. Isn't that amazing? Yeah. As he's talking, I almost wished I was taking notes. I was like, oh, that's a great point. Oh, that's it. But I think what jumps out at me is I'm not a student able to sit, under you and in your classes, on a daily basis. But what jumps out to me is how there are all these crucial moments. Mm-hmm. I'm just looking at it from the standpoint of deer hunting. Like there's all these crucial moments where the seesaw tips one way or the other. And when you just in one paragraph answer sort of went over a couple of 100 years of development as it related just to whitetail deer. What are your students at Mississippi State? Do they really get interested? You start talking about deer?
Yeah, well, I mean, they get interested in all of these environmental things for just that reason, that there's all these like surprising moments. Yeah. And that's the fun thing about teaching about wildlife or the environment or agriculture is, most people, general people, have these concepts of like how history happened, right? Whitetail deer have always been there, right? Sure, they do better in the woods than they do in a farm field. They're not going to thrive in a suburb. That's where the people are, right? And we just start flipping all these things on its head, and students love this. The fun part is being able to take environmental history and take it into classes that aren't called environmental history, because those folks, they sign up, they know that what they want to talk about, and a lot of them are hunters, right? A lot of them are outdoors people, and,
Sure.
But you sneak it into a class on, science. You sneak it into a class on the history of just American history, civil rights movement. Like people are like, wait a second, how does the environment, flip a switch in this moment? And that's the fun part.
Yeah. All right. So a deer hunter's listening, and at this point he's thinking, okay, Matt, what does this have to do with me? Why? Maybe even a landowner. Why do they need to, open up to the possibility of learning? Let's go back farther than 50 years and learn sort of back beyond what benefit. Why do they need to learn this?
Yeah, I think there's two reasons. One is, knowing the place that you live, the place that you walk around, the place that you're engaged with makes you a better person, right? I'm going to be the history professor here for a second. This this improves your sense of what the heck's happening in the world around you, right? And that makes us better citizens. Okay. But in a very specific ways, it also can help you be a better landowner if you know what was happening there, if you know the relationship between the land and the river, and how this creek has changed, and how the water quality in that creek has changed. And if you can trace that to historical things, you begin to actually piece together your understanding of the land better. And depending on what you're trying to get out of the land, you can make more money knowing that history. Right? You can get bigger deer. You can get rid of the hogs. You can solve problems by knowing this history.
Sure.
And anyone who's ever sat in a deer stand knows there's a lot of nothing going on for a long time. And just learning how to read a landscape makes it so much more fun.
Sure.
You look out there, it's like, oh, you know what? I think that this used to be a cotton field, and I could tell because there's, you can see these little erosion gullies over here. And just trying to project that onto the past makes the time go, it makes it, at least for me, it makes it go quicker when I'm sitting there waiting for something to come into the field.
And we were driving down from Starkville today, and we were driving through Winston County, and I guess just west of Louisville, on Highway 25, you go to this. There's a county jail or a prison up on one hillside, and over on the other side, you see all these erosion gullies that kind of just look like the woods. They kind of just look like trees. Yeah. But Mark and I can read this. Oh, that's an old cotton field, and they in Winston County they farmed the heck out of cotton right at the worst time to do it. And it created all this erosion, and the federal government came in and bought up all this land. They do it in the Delta. They do it all across the South. In fact, here's a fun activity for your viewers. They're going to love this. You Google a map of federal forests. Federal forests in the South are almost all severely eroded cottonland.
Really?
So you think they set that aside because it's a special. Well, it was special because it was worn to hell. It was like a moonscape. Huge craters. All the trees were gone. The people living there were in desperate poverty. And so in the 1925, federal government passes the Weeks Act.
Yeah, it really takes off in the sub-marginal land purchases of the New Deal. But that's Noxubee, just south of Starkville.
Mm-hmm. That's what that is.
Sub-marginal land purpose.
So you walk through there and you think this is a preserved place because it's always been like this and it looks so great. No. Farmers wore the heck out of that land. Okay. I'm not blaming them. That was their kind of logical reaction to what was going on. They grew a lot of cotton. The land fell apart. And the government came in and said, let's grow trees. Let's make sure the people here aren't living in poverty. And a lot of them moved to cities. And so, like the Winston County example, you know a lot more about the world you're living in if you can sort of understand what was happening there and why are there so many deer here and why are there so many other things in these other places.
And why does it look like it does? Yeah. Just from a natural curiosity thing, I know exactly what you're talking about now. Yeah. So it's a very hilly place before 25 goes up and makes the hairpin. And across from the prison, in my mind's eye, I picture forest, woods, hardwoods. And it's like this, don't drop your basketball, you'll never find it kind of hills. You're telling me that was cotton fields that eroded and the government bought that and forested it.
That's right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That is amazing. I never knew that.
Yeah. And so that's the kind of thing, like if you own a bunch of woods or if you're hunting through a bunch of woods and you can kind of understand, I think that, there's a utility in that.
Sure.
Yeah.
And it actually remade the whole region's hydrology in the meantime. Like the creeks, all the runoff, all the soil erosion, raised creek beds. It flooded stuff. There was a geographer in the 1970s set out to try and find these old dams, and he couldn't find them. He found they were all under mud.
Wow.
As a result of basically Piedmont erosion. You can see it more actually in states like Georgia than you can even in Mississippi, though you can see it in Mississippi on the hills up against the Delta.
Okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, it redid it. And of course that contributes to like issues like mollusk population declines and changes in fish populations and all that sort of stuff too.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and again, now for the less educated mind on this, now it's starting to really make sense to me when, the tie-in to wildlife and resources that way and the history of that land and landscape and how it's connected and how it's affected.
Yeah. And it's all way more recent than what we think, right?
Well, you've said that a couple of times.
Well, I mean, I just think you look at, I don't know. I think most people who are driving down the highway look at woods and they think those are woods.
Sure. Yeah.
They've been there a long time, right? Nothing's changed in those woods.
Yeah.
Like, no, actually, in the life of maybe your parents or grandparents, that was worn out cottonland. Yeah, and it slowly came back. Yeah. And those pine trees are good about pushing in on eroded land. So that's why they became forests. And yeah.
So how often do you find yourself, in a conversation with or working with, either someone in forestry or someone, in, I don't know, wildlife management and that kind of thing? Do those paths ever cross and conversations happen?
Not nearly enough.
Okay, I thought
not nearly enough. It's they are fun and they happen. And at a school like Mississippi State, you think there's so many great opportunities for the historians to walk 2 blocks and talk to the wildlife folks, talk to Extension, and we don't do enough of it. Yeah,
sure.
That's the short answer.
Sure.
Yeah, we do some of it. I'll be presenting a paper in May with an aquatic weed scientist from Mississippi State about the sort of the long-term changes in the waterways in Alabama and Mississippi as a consequence of invasive species, basically. But that's an outlier. I mean, we go to meetings, we go to some talks, and they come to ours sometimes, but not enough.
Not enough.
Yeah.
So as you were talking about that, I've got echoing in my head the things I've heard about just sort of history in general, the old adage of, if you don't know the history, you're kind of destined to repeat it sort of thing. And so from a management standpoint, when it comes to land and resources, I mean, the same's true of what we're talking about here also, isn't it?
Yeah.
Knowing it helps you to, I guess, not repeat the same mistakes.
Yeah, ideally. And to think of these spaces not as blank slates, that we can just recreate or create anew however we want, right? That what has been there before matters in terms of what you can see on that land in the future.
Yeah. You mentioned Noxubee. So the refuge there, same thing. It's kind of or similar to what you were talking about with there in Winston County?
It was not a federal forest, right? But it's a federal wildlife management area.
Refuge.
Yeah.
Wildlife refuge.
Yeah, and same deal. Eroded sub-marginal land that was put back together, sort of turned into a wildlife area by I think the Civilian Conservation Corps. Is that right?
I think so. I remember I had a student write a paper 15 years ago about the last farm family that was staying out there that had been evicted but wasn't moving. It was one of these kinds of standoffs, and there's all kinds of interesting ways of reading that story. Like your heart goes out to them, right? But also, if the land, they have made rational choices, but the land has fallen apart. Okay, right. And so the government is coming in and saying you're going to have a better life in the city, and most of their neighbors agreed, and they wanted to stay. Yeah. So, yeah. But there are spaces like that all over the South, all over Mississippi.
Sure, yeah. Sure. Cotton, you've written about it. Mm-hmm. The books, remind me.
I wrote a book about the Boll Weevil, which is called Boll Weevil Blues. Came out 10 years ago or something. Yeah. It's really good. all your
Run
viewers
out
should
and
watch
buy that
it.
book
That's
right
right. Yeah. And then I just finished a book, which won't be out until the fall. It's called The Land of Cotton. What's the subtitle? The fiber of, I should know the subtitle of my book, shouldn't I?
Well, we got to buy the book so we know the subtitle.
Right, yeah. That's the first thing you'll read. Yeah, and so that book is kind of about this transition that we're talking about. It's about two places. It's about Union County, South Carolina, which is up in the Piedmont, which has this erosion story. It was prime cotton plantation land. The governor of South Carolina lived there right before the Civil War. And then it erodes and the land falls apart. The federal government buys it, and then a forest grows up. And I kind of talk about when the forest grows up, how people there deal with that past. How do they deal with the idea that this was a cotton landscape? And they deal with it in very interesting ways that you'll have to read about.
Okay.
And then the second half of the book is about the Mississippi Delta, really Memphis and the Delta, and how the Delta became this cotton kingdom and celebrated cotton. So a lot of it is like about cotton parades and those cotton license plates that you see on the front of everybody's trucks, right? That seal of cotton, the fabric of our lives. It's about that story.
Yeah. Out this fall.
Yeah.
That's great. The cotton thing, I think, is also interesting because you mentioned it earlier about the difference as it pertains to deer and wildlife of kind of the environment that creates cotton field versus soybean, these massive soybean fields. But that's alternating depending on where we go year to year. But what was it like during those days for deer in the Mississippi Delta where it's cotton and kind of cotton only?
Well, I contributed to the low deer populations, no doubt, although most of that has to do with just overhunting and lack of regulation.
Which you touched on earlier.
Yeah, which I talked about a little bit earlier. I would say that for before the Civil War, we tend to think of like the Cotton South and the King Cotton.
Yeah.
But in point of fact, there were more acres in other crops than there were in cotton. If you
corn alone.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. Across the South, more acreage in corn than cotton.
And so people don't think of it. For the most part, the South was self-sufficient. It wasn't quite true in places like the Mississippi Valley right there because you could get, hogs up from Ohio coming down from Cincinnati or whatever it is. And maybe in regions like Alabama's Black Belt where the soil, which was the richest soil in the South that's not reclaimed swampland, basically.
Okay.
And but for the most part, it was pretty diverse. And so it was fine. But deer were overhunted by the time we get the Cotton South.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's really only after the Civil War that we get King Cotton, where 2/3 of the planted acres in Alabama's Black Belt, some of those counties are cotton, where the Delta is overwhelmingly cotton.
Okay, and that's post Civil War.
That's really post Civil War.
Okay,
and that has to do with the ease of getting other goods and
fertilizer, feed for all your other animals, all those things that you had to grow before the war. Now you've got a railroad and you can go down to the depot and get all that stuff. So you can devote all that land to cotton. I mean, the other factor here is the New York banks and banks in England and banks in Chicago are the ones who are giving the credit to these farmers, to these plantation owners in Mississippi. And they're saying, you've got to grow cotton every single acre. So they can't even make that decision to grow other things, to be more diversified. And it has a huge effect on the wildlife that will, as Mark's saying, last well into the 20th century, even as cotton transitions.
But sometimes in surprising ways, because even the tenants, like the only thing they're going to get credit for is planting cotton. Right. That's one of the reasons we get so much more. But the result is you get sort of these shabby, shoddy fields, which are ideal for other game, like bobwhite quail thrive on the edges of these fields. And so their population explodes and actually helps create like this ideal for bobwhite hunting. And now mostly they have to be released from crates and
So there's a famous environmental historian by a friend of ours named Burt Way who writes about this place in Georgia where these plantation owners basically paid tenants to grow cotton. They didn't care about the cotton, they just cared about the quail. And so well after tenant farming had ended, they're still paying families to live there and kind of scratch out an existence because it created this perfect environment. And then they could bring all their northern friends down to hunt.
And where was that?
That was in southwest Georgia.
The Red Hills of Georgia.
Yeah. Okay. How about that?
Yeah, it's interesting.
So the real economy there was quail hunting.
Yeah.
It was just, a little cotton here, there was kind of the means and maybe the cherry on top, I guess, if you If you had a good
I'm
one
not
that
even
year.
sure they harvested it.
Yeah.
And of course, it contributes to other things. All the erosion that cotton creates is the incentive to bring kudzu to the United States to stop erosion, right? And this becomes an iconic Southern plant. Like this is the vine that ate the South. Didn't really eat the South, but people like know it as this. And so like these landscape changes that we think of as, like quintessentially Southern, come about as a result of these agricultural landscapes. And of course, different species adapt to them in with different degrees of success.
And it's fascinating to kind of hear the high points that y'all are touching on, and how it overlaps for the hunter and has historically for the hunter. It's just really fascinating to think about it. And it never stays the same very long, does it?
Not really. I mean, history moves in cycles. And once you start breaking down Mississippi into all these different subregions, I mean, nothing lasts. Yeah. I mean, I have a graduate student right now named Charlie Jones, who's writing a PhD dissertation on hog hunting. And what he's finding is that, there was complaints in the 1940s about not having enough stuff to hunt. And so some government officials for the state of Mississippi go over to Georgia and they get some hogs and they bring them into Mississippi and they release them. And all of the newspaper articles are like, hey, this is going to be great. You should hunt these Russian boars. And pretty soon they're saying, okay, start hunting. Got a lot of them.
And then pretty soon here we are.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. But now most people blame that on DeSoto, right? They think, well, the pigs are here because DeSoto brought them through 500 years ago. Like, well, some of them.
But history says we did some of that on purpose.
Yeah.
We needed something to hunt.
Yeah. There's lots of that, lots of those examples.
Yeah, I think we see the law of unintended consequences really clearly in environmental history in ways that you can sort of pretend don't exist. I mean, you were talking about the ways in which historians or environmental history can help hunters. I think most historians would do better to embrace some of the attitudes of hunters in the sense that you're always observing things. Like people know, like if you're in the middle of a pine thicket, not going to be very much there. Right. You're sitting under in bottomland with oak trees. You know what? You're going to see something's going to come through there. Mm-hmm. And so you sort of, they're observing stuff. They realize that material things matter. And this is one of the things that environmental historians have tried to do. I mean, you're talking about why they emerged in the 1960s. It wasn't just these ideas about the environment were changing. Like they were saying, hey, the stories that we've told can't explain why the Great Lakes are sudsing. Right. They can't explain why animals are suddenly gone. Yeah. Like we haven't been asking the right questions. If we can't address these issues here, we need to rethink the questions we're asking. Yeah. And so, I would just say.
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking about like the political side of this, which is interesting because it has this origin in a political moment of the rising environmental movement. But environmental history is not one of the more political parts of history. Like, environmental historians are really just trying to find answers to why things changed and what role nature played and what role people played. And a lot of times that has helped out policymakers in different states across the country who say, well, as an environmental historian, published this book on this, and now we can make a better plan to change this law. And a lot of times the result is not regulation, right? The result is, hey, let's listen to the farmers. Let's let hunters make more decisions and all those kinds of things.
Sure. Right. And it sounds like, I wonder if this would be a right assumption that you could say politically, whether somebody or some group of people or different groups of people agree on an action or a response, everybody can agree that observation and study is important. Like let's agree on that.
Well, and one of the great tools that environmental historians have is the records of hunters. Right. So journals that they left behind, account books on, well, what are they buying, where, and why? Why was Teddy Roosevelt hunting in the Mississippi Delta when he came here with Holt Collier and shot that bear? Refused to shoot the bear. So, as historians, we are only as good as the sources we can access. And environmental history has these great, has a great new set of sources that other historians don't have because they have hunters, they have ecologists, they have all these people who are observing the landscape and writing about it.
Well, it's a pretty fascinating arm of history and the study of history because, like, unlike maybe people or individuals, environmental history, you can go out there and stand on it, look at it, touch it, feel it, observe it now, try to link it back, dig. all those things, right?
Absolutely.
This is one of the reasons I was attracted to it. I mean, I'd never heard of it when I was in undergrad at Alabama. I took a course on the West and was introduced to some of the, founding figures of environmental history. And it had never occurred to me that I was an outdoorsy guy, that I could walk around and go for a hike with an entomologist, a geologist, or whatever it is, an ecologist of whatever sort. And this would be research. This would be no matter what I'm doing, I'm basically researching when I'm in, at least when I'm in the Black Prairie, whether it's in Northeast Mississippi or over in, Sumter County, Alabama.
Yeah.
So,
you've mentioned that Black Prairie a couple of times. And so if you were to kind of draw me a verbal outline of that area where it is, tell me exactly what we're talking about.
So you can see it from space. So if you were to
Go to space.
go to space is what you should
Jim,
do.
bring me the globe, please.
And if you were to, it curves basically from the fall line of Alabama. So where Tuskegee would be, just a little bit west of Lee County, where Auburn is. It curves west. It goes almost due west in Alabama, then up through Pickens County, sort of something begins to curve, and it curves into Northeast Mississippi.
Okay.
And it's relatively narrow swath. So if you were driving from Starkville to Columbus, when you go across, when you head out of Starkville, the pine trees disappear.
Right.
And you're looking at prairie land with, basically cedars and oaks and that sort of thing. And really rich soils. They're shallow, but they're really rich. And they're difficult to work because they're clay. But where the soil was, where the rivers were navigable, the Tombigbee ceased to be navigable mostly at Columbus. So it's why Northeast Mississippi doesn't look like Alabama's Black Belt, right? Even though it's the same soil.
Yeah.
It was the best cotton land. It's not an accident that the first capital of the Confederacy was in Montgomery, Alabama.
Right. Right on some water. Right
on the Alabama River.
Cahaba, I believe, was that? Or
an earlier capital.
Yeah.
And then, so there are a whole series of them. But these navigable waterways, especially the Tombigbee and Alabama, where they merged from the Mobile, is they're navigable, rich soil. You see the white cliffs, especially places like Epps, Alabama. Yeah. It's really, it's a sort of a subtle landscape. It's not, a striking landscape like the Rockies, but it's really beautiful, and it's the ecology is super interesting, at least to me.
Sure. You were mentioning having sort of an aha moment at some point as a young person, going, you do this and you get to work with them, and you get to do this. Pretty cool thing to do for a living, and we have that same sentiment a lot from people who sit in these chairs that maybe work for the agency, that are either law enforcement or game wardens or biologists in this field or that field. And they all had that moment at some point. They went, wait a minute, in that, line of work, I get to be outside. I get to stomp around, go here, go there, kind of in the environment. And it's really the thing that is sort of the key to leading them on the path they went into. And I guess for you have that moment too at some point.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. Mark and I are very different in terms of this, because I would qualify myself as an avid indoorsman. I never hunted as a kid. I grew up in Kalamazoo, Michigan, a small little city, and I shot a squirrel once that was on the bird feeder with the pellet gun, and I felt terrible about it, and I went out and buried it. And
did you have a funeral?
I mean, I probably said a few words. Yeah. And but I became interested in the boll weevil in the way that I explained earlier, as this kind of way to understand tenant farms, understand poor Southerners and what was happening in their lives. And then the more I became interested in in hanging out with environmental historians, because that's what you do as an academic. You start to go to conferences and, talk to other people. And then I ended up having to buy hiking boots and walk through the woods, and, didn't take long for this is actually great. Yeah, actually, I do understand this cotton field better now that I'm in the middle of it and talking to cotton farmers.
That's cool.
Whatever, so, yeah.
This may be a dumb question. If it is, Chip, feel free to edit it out. Archaeology, is that also something that, in terms of environmental history and the study of it, do you ever work with them? Does that ever overlap in the actual archaeology department, or no?
It does for me, because the story I'm telling goes back to the Creek Choctaw, Chickasaw country.
Okay.
And the way that in many ways is through archaeology. And so even things like Fort Tumpecby or Fort Toulouse requires archaeologists. And it's really helpful for me to figure out where groups were living and all of that sort of evidence. So the truth is it does. When I was trained as an environmental historian, and the field has changed a lot since then. So, but when I was trained as there was like a toolkit you would get, and historical archaeology was one of them. If you want to know what things would look like, you might look at, dendrochronology and what, how old trees were or pollen was or whatever it would be. There's still some people who do that. It's part of my work still, but it's not. I wouldn't say it's the mainstream of what environmental historians do these days.
Yeah.
The sort of parting message from your expertise and where you are to the outdoorsman listening to this podcast, as it relates to the importance of the history and the study of environmental history. What's that parting shot, kind of final message to deliver to them?
I mean, I would just say research the world, whether you're a landowner and you're hunting there, or whether you're, going to some place in Texas or Oklahoma to hunt something, learn about why the species is there, learn about why that land is there and how the government has protected it or not protected it. Take an interest in that world. It's going to make you a better hunter. And as I said earlier, it's going to make you a better citizen, a better person.
That's great. Guys, thanks so much for coming and giving us a little bit of your time. It's one of those we could go on and on and on and on. I could never ask enough questions. It's really fascinating and just really appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, man.
Yeah, really enjoyed it. Hope you did too. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you outdoors.